the reptilians have attained control of the surface through the manipulation and control of the human gene pool, imbuing certain characteristics and behaviors within human hybrids that will advance their agenda, both on a family scale and a societal global scale. What the reptilians do with a male reptilian hybrid is gradually, over a period of time, they can turn that person into a pedophile or a serial murderer, or they can even change the sexual orientation of a given abductee. Now, please don't hear what I didn't say. I didn't say that the reptilians, a gay person, is gay because the reptilians made him gay. No. In some cases, though, as I will point out in a moment, the reptilians can manipulate someone sexually, physically, and so forth, and cause them to not only change their orientation, but in extreme cases also to have a sex change operation. Barbara Bartholomew has worked with a number of guys who, over a period of time, eventually change sexes. Now, how is this done? Now, the reptilians hold a tactical high ground. And the reason for that is we have to sleep, whereas reptilians operate, for all intents and purposes, a timeless realm. Many of them are interdimensional in nature. What a reptilian will do to a male in our example is the reptilian will enter into the body of a male and quickly take over his astral dreamscape. The reptilian will eroticize the dreamscape, pervert the dreamscape. Let me give you an example. The guy finds himself in a dream. He's walking around in an empty household. No furniture. He's walking around wondering what he's doing there, what's going on. He walks into a room and suddenly he sees a gal sitting on a recliner, an easy chair. And then she suddenly poses in such a way that is sexually provocative. He immediately gets the impression that she wants to have intercourse with him. So, like most randy males, he positions himself in such a way as to engage in intercourse with her. The moment in the dream, remember, the reptilian is inside of his body. His ethereal body of a reptilian has penetrated a sleeping human, has taken over the astral dreamscape. And now the guy is at the point where he's about to engage in intercourse with the woman. And the moment he initiates intercourse, the reptilian sodomizes him from behind. And very often, at the same time that he initiates intercourse with the dream woman, not only does he get sodomized from behind, but the object of his desires morphs, shapeshifts into something entirely repulsive. It turns into his sister, his daughter, into a hermaphroditic type being, with characteristics of both sexes. He wakes up, oh my God, right? He's feeling this icky tingly sensation all over his body, from his toes all the way to the top of his head. What's happening is that's the entity. He's feeling the entity. And then he may see like a dark shadow, a dark cloud above him. And then the entity will gradually start to leave his body. And that will manifest in the form of this icky, tingly feeling in his arms, back of his neck, what have you. He thinks nothing of it. It's just some weird dream. He shunts off the experience in that back shelf labeled, don't worry about it, too weird. Let's say the next night or 2 nights later, he has a similar dream. He's about to engage in intercourse with another dream lover. And the moment he begins to initiate intercourse, once again, he's sodomized from behind. And once again, the entity the person he's about to have sex with, shapeshift into something that he's totally repulsed by. Now, you can imagine if this process continues for days and weeks, sometimes months, is it any surprise that the guy develops a sexual dysfunction? Is it any surprise that the guy develops erectile dysfunction? Because in his mind, he's made a cognitive association between heterosexual sex on the one hand and extreme rectal pain on the other, and like all these fears of horror and shame in between. Now, there are variations of this. Sometimes he will find himself with a gal who's the object of his dreams, And he may not be sodomized, but what will happen is, see, there's a parallel physical, sexual, paraphysical manipulation that's going on within the human. The reptilian is manipulating him at all these different levels, psychologically, sexually, physically. For example, he may have a dreamscape experience where he's just surrounded with extraordinarily beautiful women who all want to have sex with him. And he'll look down and he's suitably feeling randy. And he may be hugging or caressing a woman. Next thing you know, that woman shapeshifts into a little child. And then the voice in his head, which is the reptilian, is telling him, go ahead. Now he's already excited. He's already fully aroused from what happened moments before. But now, instead of a beautiful woman in his arms, it's a small child. It could be his own daughter. And the message in his mind is, go ahead. Nobody's going to know. Go ahead and do it. You want to do it, don't you? Okay, now let's expand upon that further. As I said earlier, Ted Bundy was one of many people. Did this thing turn off or what? That's a 95, by the way, see? Oh, well. The point I'm making is there are physical characteristics which are common amongst reptilian hybrids and serial murderers and pedophiles in particular. You always hear these, oh, shoot, modern technology. You always hear these FBI profilers and these psychologists saying that, oh, serial murderer, there's no way you can tell who they are. They look like everybody else. Complete nonsense. Okay, there are notable physical characteristics. Andre Chikatilo, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Now, take a look at the features, okay? Hooded eyelids, very often a pronounced brow above the eyebrows. High-set cheekbones, very often eyes sunk deep in the eye sockets, okay? Now, who was Andre Chikatilo? Well, he killed upwards of 300 children in Moscow, devoured many of them, okay? Now, I'm running out of time here, but there's something you have to understand. The reptilian overlordship and the reptilian control of the human gene pool make such horrors as the institutionalized global sex slavery, satanic rituals, what goes on at the Bohemian Grove, so on and so forth. It makes it understandable. Because during these, like satanic rituals, for example, these human reptilian hybrids, they're having intercourse. They're having sex orgies with decapitated bodies and disemboweled bodies laying around. Now, to you or I, that's extraordinarily repulsive and horrifying. But to them, it's exactly the opposite. Reptilian human hybrids and serial killers in particular, they get off on inflicting sadistic pain onto others. It's part of the reptilian concept of human ownership. They get off on inflicting pain. They get off on torturing and killing. Ted Bundy, I'll show a picture of him if I can get this mouse working. Ted Bundy, he would be strangling, that's John Wayne Gacy. Well, since I got him up, let me tell you a story. You're probably familiar with his story. Look at, once again, hooded eyelids. In some pictures, you'll see a more pronounced brow, a ridge over his eyebrows. High-set cheekbones. He used to kill and murder little boys and bury them underneath his living room in his house in Chicago. Well, there was a kid who had a very unusual, bizarre pastime. His name was Jason Moss, and he wrote a book called The Last Victim. And Jason Moss used to become pen pals with serial killers like John Wayne Gacy and Richard Ramirez and Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, Jason Moss actually got to visit John Wayne Gacy in his prison cell. Now, keep in mind that was probably the first time John Wayne Gacy had been alone with a young boy, a teenager, since he was doing all the murders. Up to that point in prison, Gacy was the only male contact he had was with his lawyer, prison guards, what have you. Well, anyway, Jason Moss, this stupid kid, goes and sees him in the prison cell. The moment he was alone with John Wayne Gacy, Gacy switched. And he started approaching Jason Moss and said, I'm going to bend you over, F you in your ass, and your blood's going to just leak all over the place, right? And he began reaching down, fondling himself. John Wayne Gacy was fondling himself. Guess what? Nothing. Because he's dysfunctional. He's impotent. So some of the things that I mentioned earlier, some of the dynamics involved, were perfectly exemplified in his case, where the first time he'd ever been around a young boy since all his murders, he switches. And you have to understand also that these reptilian human hybrids, they equate sexual gratification with inflicting pain and torture on others. It's all intermeshed with them, okay? And the psychologists bend over backwards to say, oh, it's just a psychological aberration, it's just a psychological disorder. No, there's a genetic basis for it. And some FBI profilers are starting to catch on to that. Okay, Richard Ramirez, high-set cheekbones, eyes set deep in the eye sockets. He was hailing and farewelling Satan before he went off to Disneyland, if he remembered what happened to him in court. Jason Moss was a pen pal of his. Now, I mentioned earlier these astral raptoids, serial raptoids. What they can do is they can get to know you just on the internet. They can exchange an email or two with you, but by so doing, they forge the psychic link with you, and they can immediately start coming into your dreamscape, rape you, sodomize you, just terrify you in various and sundry ways. Well, Jason Moss was writing him letters, thereby forging that psychic bond. Pretty soon, he started coming into Jason Moss's dreamscape, bending him over, trying to strangle him. I think he probably tried to do more than that. But it just shows you that what I've described has been independently described by others. Okay? He has that ability to astrally leave his body and try to assault somebody who he's only been in pen pal contact with. This is like, I don't know if they have emails anyway, but it was just through letter writing that Jason Moss had maintained communications with this guy. Personally, I'd say get a life. It's this crazy, crazy hobby. Ted Bundy. Okay, here's a good picture. Pronounced brow over his eyebrows, high-set cheekbones. He used to, like many serial murderers, either into ligature, strangling, or they're into blunt force trauma to the skull. He was both of these. He liked to try to have intercourse with his victims and strangle them and watch the life go out of their eyes. That turned him on. The moment of them dying while he was trying to have intercourse with them. He would actually come back to the dump sites where the bodies were months or years later and sexually gratify himself over the decomposed skull or the skulls of his victims. Okay? Again, it's inhuman. It's just appalling. That's precisely my point. It's inhuman. To describe his behavior merely as some kind of psychological aberration or disorder is way off the mark. Well, I'm running out of time here. How much time do I got? 7 minutes. Well, I'm supposed to leave you with a feel-good thing at the end so you don't leave here with indigestion. So, I never got around to talking about my lab. Shoot. Well, if you want to talk to me out there sometime before I leave, feel free to talk to me because I have a lot of information about military abductees. In short, they are used as multitask platforms by the deep black elements of the military because many of them are hybrids themselves, reptilian hybrids, but also the Greys and the mantis beings and other ET races have been tampering with the genetics of all these people. They've developed these innate abilities. Sometimes they don't even know they have these abilities. And one quick thing about hosting is a person isn't necessarily hosted by a reptilian. The mantis beings, the Greys, can also host people. Sometimes a troll-like looking demon entity can host people. So it varies. And not